could they leave me?
I'm amazing. What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to TruthWorks, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change? I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode.
Hello, audience. It's me, Patty McCord, and the Honorable Miss Jessica Neal. Say
Hello.
hi, Jessica.
Hi.
Today, we have a wonderful guest, Robert Glazer. Robert's the CEO of Acceleration Partners global marketing company. He's written a couple books. I'm going to let him introduce himself, but whenever I do podcasts with him, I always have a great time. He asks good questions. So we'll have the podcast pod off today because the three of us have experience doing this. So we'll all interview each other. So Robert, give us the little bit about you and what you're up to and how you got here and all that good stuff.
Sure. I'm probably, what's qualified as either two sides of the same coin, a serial entrepreneur, became unemployable. So I've started a few different companies, the largest of which, Acceleration Partners, has grown to over 300 people globally. It's a partner marketing agency. And I've also written a few different books on marketing and leadership and the things we learned along the way. I'm actually the chairman now. My longtime number two is the CEO. So I fired myself a couple years ago. A lot of this book and a lot of the evolution in our company was, as we were building it, was how do I not do all the things that I didn't enjoy in the companies that I worked for in the past, and trying to figure out our culture. And it meant breaking a lot of things. And this whole book and our whole transition program actually came from and now I'm going to butcher the quote, but it was actually an article or something I had seen you written years ago that said, hey, we're just going to tell this person the truth and we're going to give them a nice severance. And I was like, wow, and then we want them to go be from Netflix. And it was a whole paragraph, but I remember saving the article. Oh, we're going to give them 6 months severance and we're going to do all these things. And I was like, God, this is how I want people to leave our organization. We're working hard. We're building this great culture. Then people just give 2 weeks notice and it feels very weird and incongruous. And so I love this Netflix thing, but I can't give everyone 6 months severance. We're like a 10-person company at the time or whatever, 20. So like, what could we do or how could we approach the same sort of transparency and conversations? And we ended up coming up with this transition program where it was kind of like a working severance, and launching that program, which I talked about in a TEDx talk and then an HBR article and then eventually the book, because I'm just convinced that we've put so much work into hiring and so much work into culture. No one's thought about changing hiring. And we have these two things where we know that people don't work at companies forever anymore. We know that. Our left side of our brain knows that. But in the right side of our brain, these breakups act more like professional divorces than like the end of a sports contract where everyone's hurt and shocked and whatever. But you shouldn't be, because it wasn't going to go on forever. So I'm been convinced that we need a new playbook for how people leave companies.
Brilliant. And Patty and I are right with you because
brilliant also.
We're brilliant too. But it's interesting. I don't know if you know this, Robert, but I'm in VC now and I advise and help a bunch of different companies. And it's amazing to me how none of them's exaggerating, but many of them have not thought about this. I
haven't really seen any companies like we've really thought about the way.
Yeah.
McKinsey is one of them. Like, because they're like, look, when you leave, we're going to help you and train you and send you on your way. And you're an alumni and you're going to come hire McKinsey. And that's how they get all their business, right? But I haven't heard of people really think about departures, which I get it. But again, they haven't thought about the fact that people are still doing this lying, weird doctor's appointment thing. And if you go on the Glassdoor best places to work, it's like 2.5 years average tenure. We're not in the lifetime employee world anymore.
And don't you wonder sometimes, like, where the hell does it come from, right? I used to think that you got your notion of boss. Like, here's what a boss is whatever boss you see on TV from whatever generation you're
Hopefully
from.
not The Office.
Yeah, but it might be where, that might be the TV show you watch and you figure that's what work is like, or it might be Murphy Brown, or it might be, you can go as far back as you want, or your boss is whatever your working parent talked about at dinner.
Mm-hmm.
The company will screw you if you don't watch out. You gotta watch. You gotta watch your P's and Q's because management's out to screw you.
I mean, I've heard some traumatic stories of what kids went on to do after hearing their dad talk about their boss, right?
And there's still companies that perpetuate it, to be fair. I mean, I've done some work with Google, and they believe that they hire people, they still do, believe that they hire people into the, I want to say metaverse, but wrong company, right? Into the Alphabet universe, and you're there forever. Now, what they don't say is that it's Alphabet and it's not Google, and you could start working at Google and you could end up working in, self-driving cars or something, right? Because Google is a conglomerate of a bunch of different companies. But, this idea that your company is your career hasn't been true since the 50s.
No, in fact, think about what's the biggest thing that people are marketing these days? Your personal brand, right? To sort of, so it's something that you can transcend the company or the organization with. And look, there's a lot of reasons for it. The job market is more liquid. In the old days, if you lived in upstate Pennsylvania, like you could work at the steel town in your town. There was no Monster or, whatever to find other jobs. So the jobs are more, they're now not, they're less physical. The job market's more liquid. You could take a family business years ago and like run it in the ground over generations. I'm not sure that's true anymore. Like you could probably even if you have the olive grove that no one else has, these days it's probably you're competing globally against Chinese olives, and you need to figure out how to use IoT sprinklers because of climate change. Like it's just things are moving fast. And so I think organizations change and people change, and there's no pensions anymore. So that's just not the world we're living in.
No, very true. So Robert, I'm very curious. So you sort of get inspired to write this book about the 2-week notice. You're like, the world has changed. I want to do this better. I didn't do it well, maybe at my prior companies. But what was the thing that really propelled you to write it?
The actual course of events. So we're about 20 people. We're growing the company. We're starting to win some awards. I think we have a really great culture. We get these kind of 2-week notices. And I'm like, this sucks. Like what, what the hell?
How could they leave me?
I'm amazing.
Well, why didn't they want to come have a conversation about it or whatever? And again, probably because their dad or mom at the kitchen table said, this is what you do. And so, I talk about patient zero called Jim. So Jim was on a PIP, which I now don't believe in PIPs anymore, which we can talk about at length. I think it's the worst advice, the worst legal advice, all kinds of stuff. Or they just
preaching to the choir, baby. You are preaching to the choir. Yeah.
So we put Jim on a PIP, and like most people do on a PIP, when threatened with losing their job, they got better, right? And then a couple months later, Jim was slacking again in his work. And so we were like, should we fire Jim? Should we put Jim on another PIP? This was right when I kind of read Patty's stuff. I was like, why don't we have an honest conversation with Jim? Like, Jim, what's going on? And Jim just doesn't want to do client service anymore. And he's kind of burnt out on it. And we're like, okay, well, we're going to need a replacement. So why don't we try this? You can work here. Let's call it for the next 3 months and start interviewing. And we're going to start finding your replacement, and we'll slowly slot this person in, and it'll give us some time. I mean, we're in a client service business. And if you've ever had a client, whether it's your insurance agent or whatever, account turnover kills it. People, they leave the company because they don't want to, because if Jim goes, hey, Jessica, I just want to know, I'm actually going to be leaving in a couple of weeks, and someone's going to reach out and tell you who account manager is. Well, it's very different if, Jessica's on, we bring in Patty starts to take over the calls. Then after 5 weeks, Jessica's, hey, I just want you to know I'm actually moving on, and Patty's going to take over. There's so much less risk there. So we made some mistakes with that, but it actually went pretty well and like much better. And he got a new job and he was happy and he was kind of part of our alumni. And we said, let's see if we can kind of turn this into a program. And we called it our Mindful Transition Program. And we went to everyone. We said, look, if you start a conversation about wanting to leave or want to do something else, you will not be walked to the door. Like you can tell on us, like, there's psychological safety about this. We want to, and we kind of have this program where you can work here and transition your way out. And likewise, if we think something's not working, I kind of want it to be like no fault insurance. Like we're going to start the conversation. And this is also an option as well. And when people left, we didn't make it clear to the company who started it. It didn't matter. I don't believe in these massive celebrations when people leave. I think that's kind of weird. But I feel like that's the wrong incentive.
They're the worst.
But to say, hey, Jessica's going to be moving on. We want to thank her so much and you just say the same thing for everyone. We make some exceptions for like 10-year employee, senior executives, who want to write a note. But I think what you want people to see is that this no fault car insurance and that we wish them well. And obviously there's some ones that fall through the cracks. So, we still, it took us a lot of work, but we ran this program for a bunch of years. And I was like, why aren't other people doing this? So I wrote an HBR article about it, kind of what I found it. I did a TEDx talk. And what was super interesting was, a TEDx talk's 10 minutes and I had spoken about it at some HR conferences. It didn't have a lot of the how you do it. It had the why and the what. But I got notes from people saying like, I saw your speech or I saw this or whatever. I had a bunch of these messy situations coming up. And I actually decided to try having this conversation. And it was such a better outcome. I was like, well, if people are getting better outcomes and they're just like freelancing on this, like, why don't I like put all of the stuff that we learned over the 10 years together? And that was the reason for the book.
Let's talk about for a little bit from the company's perspective. Let's imagine we're releasing this in January of 2025. And so what's happening in most companies? Yeah.
So a lot of companies are starting off the year. Employees have their resolutions, which may be to look elsewhere for employment. The managers have their goals and teams, and that may be to finally deal with some of their problem employees or things that have been broken for a while. And, people are going to dance around these things until there's a really glaring performance problem. And then it's going to be some back and forth. It's going to be unrecoverable. And really what can happen is just these HR, even in this whole system, HR can help administer or whatever, but it is delivered on the manager by manager basis with real conversations.
Yes. Yep.
So, and I always say there's a difference between what someone's telling you and their facial expression, or, like Jessica, are you liking your job? Are you present? Are you engaged? And you're like, yeah. Like, yeah. This is the same thing as everyone understands.
No!
Have you ever done a reference and someone's like, so what do you think of Jessica? And you repeat the question. Patty's like, well, Jessica. I'm like, you don't have to answer. I know the answer.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
So, but this is an incumbent, like what's going on here? And you're like, well, it's not really working with my schedule now. And so one of the things I talk about in the book is that like, if I was firing Patty today and we were in a contentious blow up situation, that's probably performance. And people would look at this book and be like, I can't have Patty stay and work here. She's already toxic. It's already a mess otherwise. And that might be the case. What they're missing is that 9 months ago, Patty's performance probably started to slip and there were some problems and there was a real conversation that wasn't had. And I talk about in the book, in my experience, and I'm sure Patty, you're deeper, is that there's a lot of common roots. So I talk about symptom versus root, and we can go on the PIP. The symptom is I have a headache, right? Doctor gives you a Tylenol, we all three have headaches. I'm dehydrated, Jessica has gluten intolerance, and Patty has like a brain tumor. Like, so
I always get the brain tumor.
You get the brain tumor.
Yeah.
The Tylenol is a PIP is like the Tylenol. Like, it doesn't actually get to the source of the problem. So if we go back, it's March, Patty starts showing up to work a little late. She's flustered. Now, either we enter the cycle where I get pissed and I put her on a PIP, and then she is defensive, and then we're fighting and we don't even know what started. Or we say, look, like, Patty, like, what's going on? And there's three common roots I find. There's things that the employee has to fix. There's mostly on them. There's things the company can fix if it wants to, and there's things the company is not going to fix. So, I have this discussion with Patty, and I don't listen to her like, oh, it's all good, because I can sense there's something wrong. And so maybe Patty lost her childcare and she's totally stressed, and like this is a real kind of short-term emergent thing. And so now I understand it. And well, it's up Patty to fix it, or maybe she needs some training. I can accommodate, or we try to fix her hours. And if she fixes that problem, it's probably all better again. Maybe the middle one, Patty finds out that we've hired 3 people, at above her salary and above her level. And she was promised this months ago. And her manager screwed it up, and we realized like it's our fault. And like we fixed that, and Patty's good again.
Yeah.
Or the third one is Patty goes, you know what? You guys are a remote company, and I really thought I wanted that, but like I'm really missing an office, and we're kind of not going to change that. Right. So if those are totally different problems and remedies that I could start working on. The third one, I say, great, Patty, let's start a transition and let's help you find a company that is in the workplace, because we're not opening offices.
Or we're not doing what we hired you to do anymore.
We're not doing that. We're not changing that core value. We're not like, you're in the non-negotiable world, and we're honest about that. But, and in all these cases, Patty was yellow. She went from green to yellow, and then soon she'll be red. You can get Patty back into the green, even if she's leaving, being like, look, like, let's figure out a way. It's not tomorrow, but we need to find you a new job and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I think what you're saying that is so important for people to hear is that if you are a leader, avoiding these things and not having the conversation just isn't an option.
It is, but a problem will only metastasize.
Yes, of course. It just gets worse. And for the HR leaders out there, this actually is less risky to do this than to do the PIP.
Yeah, let's debunk that. Like, let's go.
Yeah,
because I'm not a lawyer, but I'll tell you, it's complete bullshit to say that everyone is told that a PIP saves you from lawsuits.
It actually makes them want to sue you.
You know why people sue companies? Because they're pissed.
Yeah.
I remember telling people like, so here's the number one thing you can do to avoid lawsuits. Don't piss them off.
Well, don't get them in the first. And what the defense is actually that the PIP will help us if they file a claim. That's also like after so to your point, there's that. There's also the people we'll put Jessica on at this time because I gave Patty the brain tumor. But I put Jessica on a PIP. I want to fire Jessica, and I put her on this PIP telling her, here are all the things that you need to do to get better, but I'm just doing this to cover my ass because I want to fire her in a month. Like, do we think that makes Jessica more angry or less angry? And
more angry.
My proof of this is that when insurance companies did this large scale study to figure out which doctors got sued the most, they learned that they listened to all their calls, that it was not the doctors that made the most medical errors and mistakes. It was the ones that talked rudely and disrespectfully to their patients.
Interesting.
Right. So I would never sue my pediatrician. I love her. Like, there's nothing she could, screw up. And I think the failure to lean into these relationships and to sort of, there's this other psychological, I haven't found a name for it yet, but I've identified it because I'm fascinating with cognitive dissonance. And this kind of goes into the whole PIP thing. So cognitive dissonance says you can't reconcile these two opposite things in your head. One has to be fixed, right? Because your brain can't handle it. So if I know I need to fire Sarah, we'll pick on a new person, and I love Sarah and she's a great person, my brain can't handle have to fire Sarah. Sarah's a bad person. So what I do is I start making Sarah a bad person over.
Yes, I was just going to bring that up.
I start getting really annoyed at her actions. Yeah. Then eventually I'm like, see, Sarah's lazy and this and whatever, and I have to fire her. Versus I'd use the Patty language that I sort of learned and flip to the other side, which is, Sarah, I love you, and you're awesome, but you're on our sales team and you've been at 50% of quota for a year, and you and I both know this like can't go on forever. So like, what do you want to do something different? How can, like, instead of using the relationship to lean in and have a tough conversation before a PIP, they kind of distance the person to make themselves feel better about it. And now that's where you get your lawsuit.
Yeah, it makes it really nasty. But the one thing I want to talk about that Patty and I always talk about is that the process you're talking about that you've worked really hard to do in your company allows this thing, saying goodbye, whatever you want to call it, to happen in a humane, graceful way.
Respectfully,
right?
yeah.
And everyone is walking out of the situation with their head held high, right?
They're not necessarily happy. I agree.
Yeah.
They're not happy.
But you're not making them out to be a monster.
But the other thing that's really, really important that we forget to say that I think matters as much as how we handle all this with the individual is the fact that everybody else is watching.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So this never happens in a vacuum. There are no secrets at work. Everybody knows what everybody else is making. I mean, all that stuff that as soon as you become manager, you tell yourself is true is bullshit because it hasn't changed a bit. And the fact that I don't torture Jessica. The other thing people do instead of the pip is, I know what, I'll torture her so she'll quit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, by the way, that ends in the biggest lawsuit because I know one of those lawsuits. And this new CEO came in, and this woman, he decided he was going to make her life miserable. And I think she won a $3 million lawsuit. And by the way, he probably had very objective reasons to fire her before he started to make her life miserable, where everyone's like, yeah, he's picking on her in that meeting. Like, then he left a litany of discoverable material for that he was singling her out.
But everybody else, my point is literally everybody else saw it.
Yeah.
And everybody else says, regardless of their performance, regardless of how well loved they are, regardless of their title is, oh shit, that could be me.
Yeah.
Versus, hey, I went and had a conversation with my manager and it was safe. And I talk in the book about there was a company I used to work with. They won all these culture awards. And when I asked them about their policy, they're like, look, people give like 2 weeks notice, but we kind of ask them to leave that day because it's just easier and neater and respect. I was like, do you think you're ever going to get like anyone going to, they know they're leaving that day. This is when people also argue about this, they're going to steal, they're going to, I'm like, those people stole months ago.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
If they're a stealer, they already stole.
That's right. Yeah.
My favorite quote someone once said to me, they said, I should steal this as my own at this point, but I'll be fair. And I stole it. He said, so, all these objections are so interesting, and they always come from, people that have never tried it. And someone was like, look, you can't do this. We have all these toxic people and they steal. And someone said, if you have all of these people leaving your company that are incredibly toxic, stealing stuff and doing all this stuff, you either are doing a terrible job hiring, or there's something about your culture that is so awful that it is making them this way.
That's that passive aggressive resistance is everybody's favorite activity, right? Especially technical people. It's like, we'll stick it to the man and they won't even know. It's like the conspiracy theory. So I agree with you 1,000,000%.
So I want to ask you, Robert, so why do you think more CEOs, more leaders don't think about this as a strategy?
Look, to be fair, I've met a lot of people along the way who do some version of this. Have they turned it into a program and named it and try to share it with other people? No, but I think someone told me there was a guy, his nickname was like Hatchet Jim or something like this in this organization. And everyone loved the guy, but he had like the highest turnover rate in this whole department. And people couldn't understand. And when they went in there, they found out because he was having these sort of conversations with people. Right. And they externally, it looked like he was, a GE and firing everyone, but he was just being like, come in, my door's open. Tell me when you don't want to do this. We'll figure out something. And so he had like the highest turnover rate, but everyone was leaving great and on great terms, and it was easy. And so it was a really funny story. I think that people just don't know a better way. They haven't taken the time to think about it.
I do too.
I think this thing would need to come more from leadership than from HR to say, look, we want to be different around that. And it's funny is if you're a professional services company and you're not talking about this, you are not from a culture standpoint, but you are hurting your business because that account turnover is the biggest risk that you have in terms of losing clients. You would be better off having just people sitting on a call for 3 months and not saying anything, to the client, while you could figure out who their backfill is and get them in there and try to build some rapport, than have them disappear in a week.
Yeah, and way more costly than generous severance or lawsuits and
This is like a working severance concept. Rather than paying someone to go away and not doing anything, I'm getting some utility out of them.
Right.
Jessica is a wonderful example at Netflix. Jessica left after I left, and she came back because it was a great company and she wanted to be part of it, right?
Yeah.
And so my thing about make it a great place to be from creates reputationally a situation, it becomes the story of your organization, right? And people are always think that culture is a deck. It's something you write down. It's what you put on the t-shirts. This is it. It's not just how you treat people when they come in.
The grass is not greener for a lot of them. And I think a lot of employees are embarrassed to call back because of how they left. If we go back to what happens in 2 weeks notice, well, if there's either 2 weeks, they're either fired and there's 2 weeks severance or there's 2 weeks notice. The manager and your mentor who you've worked with for years, people remember endings and they're like, that kind of sucked. Like, I remember
she
you had
left
a doctor's
us holding the bag, right?
She left us holding the bag. You had all these doctor's appointments. I was super, nice about it. I mentored you. And look, people remember the end. And so it's bad. We talked about what's bad for the company. And I think employees are on here. Here's why it's bad for the employee. We live in a world of LinkedIn and networks and otherwise. Anyone who's worth their salt in hiring does back channel references.
Of course.
And they're going to figure out who you worked with and they're going to call these people and you're never going to know it. And to that example we gave before, they're going to call me and they're going to say, what if Jessica's on your team? And I'm going to be like, Jessica, yeah. Like she, because I'm remembering how she left.
Yeah.
And so you don't realize that, like, even if you didn't give them for a reference this time, like how you leave these situations, even though you don't have to. I remember years ago, we were trying to hire someone for a job. This was 10 years ago. And it was between this guy and this woman. And the guy was like, we're like, when can you start? He's like, I'm going to start tomorrow. F them. Like, whatever. And the woman was like, I need like 3 to 4 weeks. I want to like button everything up and leave it for them and whatever. And she's been like one of the best employees that we ever hired and like one of the highest fiduciary. He was like, how fast can I leave and, screw them? So, how you leave. And even though it feels like in the moment, like screw them, this is like back to your parents, like put a bow on it, do everything you can do to like leave it in the best possible place.
Yes.
By the way, hint for those who are interviewing, the person who says that in the interview, don't hire them.
Yeah.
Because they are going to do the same thing to you. Just there you go. Little tip from Patty.
It's amazing how people think that they're not going to repeat the same behavior that you're encouraging them to do. So you might even be pissed at the company, but there's a phrase, smile bleeping, like that's what you should do. You should try, give them whatever notice, offer to console, like leave it in a good place because, if that next job doesn't work out, then you're going to need that. And by the way, if you leave well, you open this door to come back into the boomerang.
Yeah.
I think we've talked to a lot of people who left our company during the Great Resignation. They got promised all kinds of stuff that wasn't true. Those jobs I could see on LinkedIn in the last 6 to 9 months. I think some of them were too embarrassed, we heard, to like reach back out because they felt like, they made a whole grandiose, like, well, they're offering me director and giving me $30K and bleep you. And then that like lasted like 3 weeks and then they got laid off.
Yeah. That's a really good point because you're so right. People remember the ending. And if you show the company as much grace as you want them to show you,
even
then,
if they're not showing it to you, it's still beneficial because person may be in a different environment later as the reference and realize you guys were both working at a toxic company, but they really liked you and that, you were a nice person.
Right.
Yeah. I was just thinking that maybe because we used to have Jessica, when I hired Jessica at Netflix, Jessica was a recruiter and she taught us all kinds of wonderful stuff about how to be really great at hiring people, right? So one of them was, never leave anybody waiting, always get back to them on time, have really, really good discipline around basic human respect, right? If you came in for a 9-hour interview and hour number 2, we realized you weren't the one, then we don't need to waste the rest of your day. Go take your mom to lunch or something like that. And I was just thinking as we were talking, we're just talking about the same discipline, the same respect, the same courtesy on the other end of the spectrum, right? On the other end of the not spectrum, but on the other end of the journey that you go through when you work for somebody. And in the other thing I was going to comment on was we used to say in the Silicon Valley, you don't want to piss anybody off leaving because you never know if they might work for you or you might work for the small world
small
thing.
World.
But to your point, it is infinitesimally smaller now because not only do I know somebody who knows you who worked with you, I can find it out.
Yeah.
Right.
And can I just throw in a plug that you're a bad hiring manager or if you don't back channel reference in today's world, if you just take the 3 they gave you and that's lazy.
I never even ask for references.
Right.
Well, I'm not going to call them. I'm only going to call the people you didn't give me.
That's right. And when people would leave or I had these conversations with people, I remember saying, okay, I will be your reference. I'll be a reference for anybody who leaves the company. For you in particular, Robert, you're technically amazing. You've created some incredible products. I mean, it's impeccable, the work that you do. If the reference is about team player, I know when to use me.
Yeah.
But, because you were with us for 3 years.
If it's
I mean,
an individual
obviously.
contributor engineering job, great. Yeah.
Yeah. But, beyond, that's the same honesty.
Yeah.
It's this general thing of you can be, it's Kim Scott's radical candor. These combinations, the same, it's actually proven the single best form of raising kids that's most effective is called this authoritative, which is high love and high standards and challenge, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think if people feel supported, in those conversations, it's not hard to have difficult conversations if you're leaning into that relationship and the person knows, right? And I think all of these lawsuits and the bad stuff come from this making the person bad so you feel better in your mind.
It's like I hate the word firing. There aren't weapons. There's no blood, right? It's like you don't shooting somebody.
You're 50% of quota for the last 4 quarters. We're in sales. We all know, it is what it is.
And I love sales comp for that reason, right? Because look, don't get me wrong. Everybody loves you, right? You're the best birthday cake baker in the whole planet. However, you're 50% of quota, right? Which is I think what I love about sales comp because it's so measurable that way. But it's not how a lot of people come into their work. It's not how a lot of people. The other thing is, we can't. All these conversations we're talking about, we should still acknowledge that people's feelings get hurt. It's not easy to do. If you're going to have
hard to do, they're not going to be great, I need a new job.
Thank God you told me I suck. Because I didn't know that. Now I do. And that makes me feel so much better.
I remember having this conversation with Reed one time. Reed was our CEO at Netflix. And I was like, why does everybody get so mad? We've been talking to this person for months. Right? None of this is a surprise. Right. And he was like, Jessica, when you're a Yankee and somebody kicks you off the Yankee team, it's really hard to go be a Met, and it just hurts.
Unless they pay a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Unless they paid you a lot. But he's like, you're wearing the Yankee uniform. It's a different uniform than the Met unit. And it's just and that just always stuck with me. And so I think I brought that into conversations of knowing their egos are going to be hurt. Their confidence is going to be hurt. And they're going to be thinking what do I tell my wife? What do I tell my parents?
Yeah. Psychology is, humans, Morgan Housel wrote this great new book called Same as Ever. And it just talks about you can just count on humans behaving the same way as over time. That's the one thing you can count on is that humans react with the same defense mechanisms and otherwise. But I like the sports analogy. I want to go back to that for a second because in this context, it's one, as I said earlier, we're acting like these are marriages when they're more like
family.
Everyone would be better that it's a 2-year contract. And at the end of the contract, we revisit it. Do we want to pay more money or less money? Or we're a running team and you're a passer. And so, that's interesting. The other is there's plenty of players in sports right now who are playing for their team and doing a great job. And everyone knows they're not re-signing, right? They know. This is what people house at work. I'm like, they know that this is the end of, doesn't mean they can't play well.
Yeah, I was in
Right.
I was in a conference one, and the guy who is the coach of the San Antonio Spurs,
Popovich.
yeah, Popovich,
Yeah.
and somebody, and it was a L&D conference, that's learning and development, and everybody was very sensitive, and somebody in the audience said, "Oh, Mr. Popovich, it must just break your heart that you spend so much time scouring the country for the most talented players who join your team, and they play their heart out for a whole year, and in the end, you could just cut them. Doesn't it just tear you up?" And he goes, "No, it's professional basketball." Right? And I'm in the audience thinking, we're perfectly fine saying that to a 26-year-old guy on a basketball team, but God forbid we would say it to a 45-year-old.
But it's weird. It in basketball, I mean, there was age, he just knew he wasn't going to be on that team for 20 years, and we know that. We're just pretending like that's not the case. We know that it's not going to be. That person knows they're not working there for life. If you ask me over under, hire somebody to be here for 5 years, I'm like, it's a toss up. So it's just, we can't bring that incongruity.
Yeah, but we still have all these leftovers. I mean, I was talking to a group of CEOs in Canada once, and there's 600 of them in the room. I'm like, how many raise your hand if you're in the job that you had when you graduated university? I mean, 0 hands go up. I'm like, how many of you think that the number one metric for people is retention? 600 hands go up. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't get them both.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think that certainly in the last couple of years, with all the changes that we had in the way that we work, like I know that you do most of your work, or your company does, remotely, right? And so for me, that was a muscle that was always there. We could have always worked remotely, we just didn't. And so I think
doesn't
that
work with bad cultures because it requires trust and flexibility and accountability.
And accountability. But I mean, we've learned all those things.
Yeah.
So the thing is that's sort of really important to me to say in every single podcast that we do, which is we figured that out. So do better.
Yeah.
Right. We can do better. It's not the same as it used to be. We're not going back. The steel mills aren't coming back in America.
Yeah.
So, but they might, and they might come back in a completely different way. Like, let's learn as leaders to understand that it's our job to communicate to people, particularly early in their career. By the way, right, this song doesn't go on forever.
If you feel that urge or that itch or something, like, come and have a conversation with me and we'll figure it out. Like,
yeah. And
exactly.
I say to managers, like, your job is to create resume worthy events.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Your job is to create things that people will say to the next employer, because there will be one. Yeah, let me tell you about what I did there. It was really cool.
And sometimes you're helping people because, look, inertia gets in their way.
Yeah.
And they're we had someone that we sort of moved into a transition more from the company led, and and then we offered to support them, and I was asking them what they wanted to do, and I don't think they would have left because I think they liked who they were working with, but I think it hadn't been the right fit for a while.
Yeah.
But again, people leave bad; they don't leave good enough.
Yeah.
But when I talked to this person, I was like, so tell me what you want to do. They listed all opposite things of their current job. So I just thought that was pretty, they wanted to be in a different industry, and a different kind of thing.
Totally had those conversations, haven't you,
too.
Jessica?
Yes.
And I mean, and you kind of look at them like, you are
You
aware.
know you don't want to do this. You realize
like
that.
you are in a
right?
job that
Like-
you doesn't have any of those things in it.
Robert, you did say one thing earlier where, you said this should come from leaders. And I don't disagree with that. But I also think those on the HR side that are listening, this can come from you too.
Yeah, the program. So I think HR could sort of set it up. And one of the things we worked with HR, when people are like, they don't believe us. So we were like, all right, let's get some incentives. Hey, $2,000 bonus for 90 days notice window, $1,000 bonus. Like we started. So HR was a big partner in administrating. The only thing I was saying that those opening up conversations have to start with a manager. You're not going to probably walk in.
No, and I don't disagree with that. But, the HR leaders can also point this out to their organization and say, hey, manager, this is your job.
Yeah.
And also, we're going to rethink how we do this because the traditional way of doing it, us doing the PIP playbook, that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, where and to your point, where it is their job is they say, I have a problem with Sally, and they say, look, like we have the red pill and the blue pill. Like you can offer Sally the PIP thing, or you could try to have a conversation with Sally and tell her about this program and tell her how it works and try to get her to opt into it. It's always better for the employee to opt into it. Like when they are opting into it, there's a little, there's always a little, as Patty was saying, there's some baggage around that. But if you can make it their idea, it's so much better.
So much better. Okay, everyone, we're headed into career confessions. Here we go. How do I be honest in my exit interview? After a year in my role and 3 at the company, I decided to hand in my month's notice and will have an exit interview meeting in a few weeks. My problem is I'm leaving because I don't feel supported or properly understood by my managers. They aren't good communicators and I feel constantly overlooked. So I found a better opportunity somewhere else, but I'm worried about actually having to voice those concerns and want to keep things pleasant as there's certainly no malice on either side.
Look, it depends. Some people it's cathartic and they feel like it's a chance to be heard where they haven't heard. I think you probably need a little read on the culture to know whether it's going to go anywhere or it's all risk and no reward.
Yeah.
That's and I think you can also express that while you really like the people, this is where the shortcomings were. I think it really depends whether you feel that that's going to do any good or it has risk that's going to get back. And I know some departments, hold it back and do a good job, and others, rat it out to their friend, and you could have some problems. So I don't know. I think this is the problem with exit interviews. Sometimes people have more to lose than they have to gain.
Oh, it's got so much. There's just so much bad shit about this, right? I mean, and it's so dependent on who does it, right? Like, so is your exit interview with HR taking notes going, well, let's just find out how fucked up your manager was because we're going to go punish him after you're gone. Or is it like, I'm listening, but I don't really care. Right. Or am I checking off the boxes of, it was bad management or whatever. It's a missed opportunity, I think, for whoever's doing the exit interview and the person to both learn something about each other. Why didn't you feel like you could have that conversation with your manager? Right. So, and to be able to ask them, so is it about the way you felt like you were treated? Give me an example of what that was. Right. Because a lot of times it's really good feedback for the manager who didn't realize it.
I agree. But I think, exit interviews have to be, it really does matter who's doing them. And if it's a check the box or if they're really curious about, what happened. But for the employee asking this question, I think, Robert, your point is pretty fair. Like you got to know the culture, right? Yeah. And if you feel like it's safe and the person that's doing the interview is coming in a curious, wanting to learn way, then maybe you divulge some of it in hey, here's what I think the organization could do differently, right? But you really got to think about it because as what you were talking about earlier, Robert,
it's your last conversation.
This is your last one. This is how you end, right? So this is what they're going to remember. And so if you get in there and you're like, blah, 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 and this and that, and blah, 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 I don't know. So you got to.
If you were just probability weighting there's more potential for harm than benefit. Like, right?
Yeah. Didn't we, Jessica, at one point, didn't we experiment with doing exits like a month after they left or something?
We did. But I think it was failed because people would forget. and then we couldn't
in their new job.
Yeah. Or it was hard to get in touch with them. So folks on our side forgot. And then it was hard. People, they'd moved on. They were busy at their new job. They didn't really, or they forgot, like, I don't know. It's fine.
I bring this up for all of those who are managers out there. It's like, we tried a bunch of stuff. I mean, we're always trying to do it better. And some of it didn't work, right? It's like, well, maybe we should wait until they've like settled down and they're not so pissed anymore, and they'll be able to tell us the truth. Because to your point, Robert, it's like, in some companies that was like, okay, you want to blackball yourself forever?
Yeah.
Talk shit about your manager on your way out. So
Yeah.
yeah.
This was so fun.
Yeah, it was.
If people want to find out more about the book, about you, where should people go?
Sure. They can go to robertglazer.com. The book's on audiobook and ebook everywhere. I also have the first 3 chapters up for free on my Substack, which is, so if you're on the robertglazer.com and you click on Friday Forward, it takes you to my Substack and you can just get the first 3 chapters. It's like half the book and you can see if it strikes your fancy.
Cool.
Thanks for listening to TruthWorks. This episode was produced by Megan Hayward. Thank you to Kathleen Speckert and the whole Edit Audio team.